Let's go live to the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, after the inflation number.
Very substantial and now sustained progress in the fight against inflation. It means that headline inflation is now at an almost 4-year low and now sits in the middle of the Reserve Bank's target band, and underlying inflation is now at its lowest in 3 years. These are very welcome developments. We don't pretend that it's mission accomplished on inflation, but we are making very substantial progress. Now, on every measure, we have now made substantial and sustained progress in this fight against inflation. Inflation was much higher and rising fast under the Liberals, and when we came to office, we've been able to get on top of this inflation challenge and to get it down in a very meaningful way. Inflation is now almost a third of the 6.1% that we inherited when we came to office. Now, if you look at the numbers, headline inflation was just 0.2% in the December quarter. That makes it 2.4% higher through the year, which is around a quarter of its peak and in the bottom half of the Reserve Bank's target band. It means our headline inflation is now lower than most major advanced economies, including the US, the UK and Germany. And if you look at the underlying measure, the trimmed mean measure, it was 3.2% through the year to the December quarter, down from a revised 3.6%. If you look at the trimmed mean number in the quarter, it almost halved. It's now 0.5%, and that makes it around a third of what it was at the time of the election. Now, if you look at the big drivers of this moderation in inflation, the big drivers were construction costs, rents and insurance. And that, I think, is quite an encouraging sign that inflation is moderating more quickly than anticipated, even as recently as the forecast that we released in December. So these numbers are better than the market expected, and they are lower than the forecasts for inflation. And both of those developments are very welcome. Now, Australians collectively can be really proud of the combination of developments that we have seen in our economy in recent times. Inflation is down, wages are up, unemployment is low, and 1.1 million jobs have been created during the course of this Albanese Labor government. Now, the soft landing that we have been planning for and preparing for is now looking more and more likely. Many countries around the world have paid for this kind of progress on inflation with much higher unemployment or with negative quarters of economic growth. What Australians have been able to achieve is an economy where growth has continued to tick over, albeit slowly, where unemployment has stayed incredibly low, jobs are being created, wages are up, but inflation is down considerably, and we see that in the numbers again today. Our cost of living pressures aren't disappearing, but they are easing. We know that the fight against inflation is not yet over, but these are incredibly encouraging signs that we are getting on top of this challenge in our economy. The worst of the inflation challenge is now well and truly behind us, and that's one of the reasons why we are confident but not complacent about the economy in the year ahead. Now, we know that our political opponents will try and dismiss and diminish what Australians have been able to achieve together in their economy. We know that Australians are doing it tough. We know how important our cost of living help is, and we know that the best thing we can do, the most important focus that we can maintain, is on the cost of living, and that is the government's approach. The Albanese Labor government is focused on beating inflation and helping with the cost of living and building Australia's future. Our political opponents, Peter Dutton and the Coalition, are focused on conflict and culture wars, and they would make people worse off and take Australia backwards. Now, if we look at the impact of the cost of living measures over recent years on the cost of living pressures that people face right around Australia, it's worth reminding people that Peter Dutton did not support cost of living help for Australians doing it tough. If Peter Dutton had his way, Australians would have been thousands of dollars worse off, and they will be worse off still if he wins the election. And that's because when he was the health minister, he went after Medicare. Coalition governments want lower wages, not higher wages. And he will push up electricity bills with his nuclear insanity that he has been trying to foist on the Australian people. So the choice and the contrast is very clear. The biggest risk to inflation and the cost of living and the economy in 2025 is Peter Dutton and a coalition government. For our part, the Albanese Labor government is focused on getting inflation down, getting wages up, rolling out this cost of living relief, keeping unemployment low, because that is the best way that we can make a meaningful difference to the cost of living pressures that we know Australians are still confronting.